Now, Dr. Birx does have to, I guess, address one of the worst early moments of her performance as an aide in this effort in the White House. And she does so in the CNN interview while talking about her overall strategy for dealing with politicians who don't necessarily trust science. Let's take a look.
If you knew anything about this White House, they kind of had an anti-science, or at least not a significant science-supported reputation. How did you plan on dealing with that?
You know, I've dealt with presidents and prime ministers around the globe who will often have misperceptions about diseases and the community that disease impacts. But I've always found that if you can find that common ground with the information and data, they will change policies. He's been so attentive to the scientific literature and the details and the data. And I think, and it's part of the reason why I did say at one time, the president looked at the data and understood the data, because he wouldn't have shut down the country for 15 days and then another 30. But that never really happened again, because there were too many parallel streams of data.
Okay, and look, in the extended interview, which you can find, she goes into those parallel streams of data and they talk about where they're coming from, and they correctly identify, I think, that Scott Atlas was one of those, although they imply that there are others. I don't know, there's a certain amount of investigation into that sort of seems at some point superfluous. Like, I don't necessarily believe that Trump changed his view because of Scott Atlas. He brought in Scott Atlas because Scott Atlas was saying the sorts of things that he wanted to hear on Fox News. I feel like the causality is weirdly being diagnosed going in the wrong direction there. I think he started looking for people like that because it was a convenient thing politically for him. The weight of the sort of ideological pressure was to reopen regardless of what happened. So let's get some people wearing suits to say that that's the right thing to do. I don't think it was that he was having these meetings with Birx and he was like, you know, I was checking your methodology and I really think that you're missing some things. I just don't think that that's what happened. I think her strategy in theory could work. It is not necessarily a terrible strategy to go in with most politicians who are vain, simple, and curious creatures and sort of flatter them and that sort of thing. And Trump is perhaps the clearest example of that. The thing is, if you do that publicly, like, it's one thing to do it in meetings with them to try to make them feel better about all this. But if you go out, and one of the first things we see from you is you saying that Donald Trump of all people could be a doctor, that he's just absorbing all of this stuff. And then you leave that out there and he's in charge now and he's communicating about, hydroxychloroquine and all that, then that's done some actual damage, I think. And you rolled the dice, I guess, and it didn't work out, and it's consequential. And look, there's a lot more. We don't have time to go into everything. She talks about how she feels like she was being censored. I guess maybe, but you're a public figure. Like, you can get on any one of these networks. If you feel like there is a message that they won't let you deliver at a White House press conference, but has to above all be delivered, you can do that. It's not really being censored. It's like not being boosted, but at a certain point, maybe a message being delivered is more important than you still being on the inside, especially if we're into August or September and it's clear that they're not listening to you anyway. I don't know. Fauci speaking out for means something, but a lot of it just feels like PR. It feels like PR way after the fact. It feels like a continued effort to be able to work your way back into the Biden administration, and probably for the right reasons, probably wanting to help, but that it sort of reeks of that, and I just don't like it.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.